welcome to the deep dive. We often encounter philosophy as, well, something purely intellectual.
Right, something abstract that you study in a university classroom.
Exactly, a kind of historical catalog of great minds. But what if we've fundamentally misunderstood its purpose?
What if it was always meant to be something more?
Yes. What if, at its very root, philosophy wasn't just designed as a pathway to knowledge, but as a robust recovery pathway for the suffering soul?
That's the question.
Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into an approach that does just that. It bridges ancient Greco-Roman wisdom, the radical moral thought of Friedrich Nietzsche, and a very modern structured therapeutic system called logic-based therapy.
That's right. And our mission today is really to move past the typical academic survey. We want to understand how philosophy can function as a prescriptive, a transformative tool.
So not just ideas, but actions.
Exactly. We're focusing on logic-based therapy, or LBT, and how it deploys these philosophical principles to treat the irrational premises that fuel addictive dynamics.
And Nietzsche's the key here.
He is. We're going to explore why Nietzsche's extreme affirmation of life, his command to embrace reality wholeheartedly, offers such a powerful antidote to the underlying nihilism that so often characterizes addiction and despair.
Okay, so the goal for you, the listener, is to see how these complex ideas can be distilled into a clear understanding of the core, logical, and, I guess, existential conflict at the heart of the recovery process.
And to make these ideas immediately applicable.
Before we jump into Nietzsche's critique, which is pretty intense, we need to set the stage. We need to establish this foundational concept you mentioned, philosophy as a way of life, or PWL.
Yes. For many modern listeners, as you said, philosophy is just something you study.
Right, an elective you take in college.
But that's a very narrow and actually a very recent definition. We have to recall the ancient Greek understanding.
Back to the Stoics and Epicureans.
Precisely. For them, philosophy wasn't merely an academic discipline or a stack of books. It was inherently an art of living.
An art of living. I like that.
It was a comprehensive method of spiritual progress, intended to transform an individual's entire mode of being, your whole perception of reality. It was a therapeutic practice.
That sounds almost like early psychotherapy.
It was, in a way. Profoundly transformative. The whole tradition emphasizes that true philosophical understanding must lead to a change in your actual daily life, in your reactions, your moral alignment, your character, or what they called your ethos.
And it was the French philosophers who really brought this idea back into the modern conversation, right?
Yes, most notably Pierre Hadot and Michel Foucault. They were instrumental in reviving this Greco-Roman model. They argued very convincingly that historians of philosophy have often just missed this. They've failed to see how pervasive this therapeutic or ascetic approach really was.
And the practical application of this, the how-to, centered on what they called spiritual exercises.
Yes. These weren't vague meditations. They were specific, repeatable methods, things like contemplation, premeditation of evils, dialectic, rigorous self-examination, all intended to transform the practitioner.
To make them freer, happier.
Freer, happier, and more rational. It's a view of philosophy that deals directly with the well-being of the individual, providing tools for self-mastery.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly for logic-based therapy then. LBT sounds like a modern, structured attempt to operationalize this whole tradition.
That is exactly right. LBT, which was developed by the American philosopher Eliot Cohen, is presented as a structured, modern example of PWL.
And it has similarities to things like cognitive behavioral therapy, I assume.
It does. Like cognitive approaches, especially rational emotive behavior therapy, or RET, LBT aims to identify and refute logical errors in your thinking. But, and this is crucial, LBT has a key distinction.
And that distinction is what elevates it beyond just simple cognitive reframing.
Yes, LBT doesn't just stop at telling you your logic is bad. That's not enough. It links each of the 11 identified cardinal fallacies, these patterns of irrational thinking, to a specific guiding virtue.
A virtue, so an aspirational goal.
An aspirational ought, yes. And that virtue, in turn, points toward what Cohen calls an uplifting philosophy, a specific philosophical perspective chosen to promote that virtue.
So it provides what? Psychic scaffolding for the change?
Perfect phrase. It provides genuine psychic scaffolding. The structure is identify the error, which is the fallacy, replace the error with the virtue, and then sustain the replacement with the uplifting philosophy. That three-part synthesis is what makes it so powerful for these deep existential conflicts you find in recovery.
Okay, let's jump into the philosophical deep end. To really understand the cure, we first have to understand Nietzsche's profound diagnosis of the poison.
His critique of Western culture.
Right. Where does he begin?
Nietzsche saw the core error of Western thought in its adherence to traditional metaphysics. He believed that almost 3 millennia of Western philosophy, starting right from Plato, was fundamentally based on a false dichotomy.
A false split.
A false split between the world we actually experience, the sensible, immediate, messy world, the world of appearance, and a distinct higher reality, what he termed the true world.
This true world concept, I mean, it sounds like something that only concerns academics in an ivory tower. But you're saying it has catastrophic real-world consequences.
It absolutely does, because it informs our entire value system. It dictates what we think is important.
So where do we see this pattern?
Well, you see this metaphysical move across history. Think about Plato. He located the truth of being not in the changing, observable world,
But in his eternal, perfect, ideal forms.
Exactly. The world of our senses is just a shadow and inferior copy. That right there is the intellectual blueprint for prioritizing a reality that is not here.
And this impulse, it just keeps going, even in later, more rationalist thought.
It persists. Look at Descartes, centuries later. He placed his ultimate confidence in logical, clear, and distinct ideas, right? But what guarantee their reliability at the end of the day?
A perfect, transcendent God.
A perfect, transcendent God. So the truth still rested outside of and above the immediate, flawed sensory world. The pattern holds.
Okay, but what about someone like Kant? He famously tried to limit our ability to know that transcendent realm.
Yeah.
He seems like a break in the pattern, but he still falls into Nietzsche's critique.
He does. Kant tried to establish the boundaries of reason, arguing that while we can only know phenomena things as they appear to us, we are still compelled to posit the existence of things in themselves.
The ding and sitch.
The ding and sitch. These are the ultimate necessary objects of experience that, crucially, cannot be known through representation or observation.
Wait, okay, if the ding and sitch can't be known, why does just positing its existence still devalue the world of appearances? That's the part I'm trying to get my head around.
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
For Nietzsche, even if Kant makes the true world unknowable, the very act of positing its existence maintains the hierarchy.
Ah, I see.
It suggests that the reality we inhabit is still secondary, still somehow flawed or merely phenomenal compared to this untouchable, unrepresentable reality.
So the damage is done the moment you infer this world beyond, even if you can never get there.
Precisely. The consequence, according to Nietzsche, is disastrous. The moment you infer this transcendent reality, you begin to superimpose a fictitious, ideal, nonsensible idea of reality onto the sensible world. And if you believe that fictitious framework is the real roadmap for life, a world without suffering, without contradiction, it inevitably results in the negation of life itself. The here and now is rendered unworthy.
And this leads us directly to nihilism, which I think is a word that gets thrown around a lot and is often misunderstood. It's not just believing life has no meaning.
No, Nietzsche's concept is far more sophisticated. Drawing from thinkers like Bernard Regenster, we can understand Nietzschean nihilism not as just subjective despair, but as a diagnosis of our entire culture's value system.
So what is it, specifically? Specifically, nihilism is the belief that our highest values like eternal perfection, universal justice, a complete freedom from suffering, are unattainable in this world. And crucially, that no alternative world exists where they can be realized.
So it's not that the nihilist doesn't believe in values, it's that they believe their values are too perfect for this imperfect world.
Exactly. And this belief system is rooted in Platonism and Christianity, which both posit a world beyond where this perfection resides.
So when modern man realizes, as Nietzsche famously declared, that God is dead,
and that transcendent realm is logically or scientifically closed off, those highest values are suddenly left floating in a void. Their unattainability on Earth becomes painfully obvious, and the result is the belief that this actual, sensible, suffering existence is unworthy of being lived.
Okay, and this brings us to a really powerful concept in the outline, true world ideologies as pharmacon. This seems to connect the huge philosophical problem directly to the psychological dynamics of addiction. This is a profound connection. These true world ideologies, and they could be overtly religious like paradise or seemingly secular like utopian Marxism or some forms of extreme political perfectionism, they all operate by positing a perfect, often impossible destination.
A state of bliss.
A state of bliss, a utopia.
Yeah.
And that destination gives meaning to all your current suffering. It frames your present life as merely a necessary, difficult journey toward an ultimate arrival. The belief is that this arrival will more than make up for all the discomfort of your current existence.
So the ideology acts like a comfort, a kind of medication.
It acts as a pharmacon.
Oh,
And as you know, that Greek term is powerful because it means both cure and poison.
right.
An ideology can seem to cure despair by providing structure and purpose. But Nietzsche contended that these true-world ideologies are a pharmacon that poisons because they are inherently life-negating.
By positing that ideal, they force us to reject our immediate imperfect existence.
And that leads to the belief that our highest values are perpetually unattainable right here. The very system designed to save us makes us reject the only reality we inhabit. This sets up the perfect condition for what you could call ideology addiction.
That makes sense. The poisonous nature of this pharmacon creates a susceptibility to it.
Yes, driven by the utopian fantasy. Adherence to an ideology like this can become psychoactive. It can be mood-altering. It offers an immediate intoxication, a psychological homeostasis that temporarily transports you into a fantasy world.
And that's especially compelling for someone whose sense of self is already shaky.
Especially for individuals suffering from a narcissistic disturbance or a scant psychic structure where the stability of the self is already precarious, this provides a desperately needed structure.
And these ideologies often rely on a very powerful emotional feedback loop, what Nietzsche called resentiment. This seems absolutely central to understanding anger and blame in addictive cycles.
It's critical. Resentment is the habitual, chronic recycling of perceived injustice and hatred. It's that feeling of helplessness, resentment, and anger that is felt, and then felt again and again.
The word itself, resentiment, feeling again.
Exactly. Utopian ideologies, which are predicated on impossible, perfectionistic ideals, inevitably breed resentment when the world refuses to conform. Since the utopia never materializes, the adherent is forced to find the cause of the failure somewhere else.
So they project the blame outward.
Absolutely. An other is identified, an enemy, a social class, a political group, as the entity that's hindering the utopia's actualization. And onto this enemy, all that collective resentment is projected.
And that provides a pretty potent emotional narcotic, doesn't it?
A very potent one. It's an intoxicating mix of meaning, moral superiority, and crucially for the addict, an abdication of personal responsibility. It allows you to adopt a victimized stance.
And Simone de Beauvoir's warning here really drives home the ultimate moral danger of embracing this kind of perfectionistic, future-based philosophy.
Her critique is vital. Beauvoir warned that these true-world philosophies, by offering final, objective answers to incredibly complex ethical dilemmas, provide dangerous consolations from what she called existential ambiguity.
So they give you certainty where there shouldn't be any.
Yes. A utopian vision, whether it's the perfect heaven or the perfect classless society, fosters a mentality that justifies sacrificing the present, and often sacrificing the individual for an anticipated, promised future.
And historically, this mentality has justified the worst atrocities imaginable.
From genocides to inquisitions. For Beauvoir, ethical conduct demands that we acknowledge human freedom through spontaneous, responsible choice, not that we evade reality by striving toward these static, absolutist, and often unattainable goals.
So if Western culture is saturated with these life-negating values, Nietzsche's diagnosis is that we are fundamentally narcotized. We're caught in a profound sleep.
That is his blunt assessment. He famously equated Christianity and alcohol as the two great European narcotics. He said they both produce a state of sleep, characterized by quiescence and resignation, a kind of philosophical numbness to the suffering inherent in existence. Both function as a palliative, just dulling the pain of life's decline.
And in his analysis of Christianity, it's the ascetic priest who facilitates this deep sleep.
Yes, the ascetic priest, a figure he analyzes in the genealogy of morals, only gains power when life is already waning, when the culture is already suffering. The sufferer needs narcotic relief, but can't confront the external causes of their pain.
So the priest steps in.
The priest intervenes by solving the riddle of suffering, by locating the cause inwardly. He transforms it into moral guilt and sin.
Why does that help the sufferer? It sounds like it would make things worse.
Because it creates a mechanism for self-narcosis. By defining their discomfort as a moral failure, the sufferer is enabled to release tension and act out against themselves through guilt, self-flagellation, rigid moralism.
So the self-inflicted punishment gives a perverse sense of control.
A sense of control, yes. And it offers the repose of deepest sleep, obscuring the true, complex, and often uncontrollable nature of the world.
But, and this is so important, Nietzsche was clearly not against all forms of heightened experience. This is where his distinction between narcosis and Rausch becomes absolutely essential.
It is the hinge of his entire therapeutic project.
Mm-hmm.
He differentiates sharply between narcosis and Rausch.
So what's the difference?
Narcosis promotes dulling, banalizing effects. It obscures suffering, it induces resignation, and it's inherently life-negating. Rausch, by contrast, is affirmative intoxication.
Affirmative intoxication.
It's a visionary state,
Yep.
a profound spiritual or aesthetic feeling that promotes creativity, the creation of new values, artistic style, and self-affirmation.
So can you give us a tangible example? How would we know the difference?
Think of it this way. Narcosis is the escape artist who just wants to forget the pain of their life for a few hours by getting drunk or obsessing over a political fantasy where someone else fixes everything. It's pure evasion. Rausch, however, is the state of the artist or the mountain climber who is intensely focused, deriving profound affirmation and meaning from the very resistance of the material or the mountain. They're intoxicated by the act of creation and overcoming. Rausch is the antidote to modernity's slumber.
And this brings us to his famous warning about the death of God. It was less a celebratory cheer and more a grim prophecy, wasn't it?
It was a monumental warning. His declaration that God is dead meant that Western society had lost its principal metaphysical narcotic, the Christian true world, and the structured repose of deepest sleep that came with it.
And he foresaw that this would leave a huge void.
He foresaw that when we unchained the earth from its sun, humanity would frantically search for and invent perhaps even more terrifying narcotics, new utopian ideologies, more potent psychoactive substances, technological escapism, anything to replace that structure and fill that existential void.
So for him, using drugs and believing in a true world were really two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Both served as nihilistic forgery and ideals because they both obscure the real world's inherent suffering and detach users from true, self-created meaning.
Okay, so if traditional metaphysics poisons life by creating an ideal that denies suffering, how does Nietzsche manage to reframe suffering to become life-affirming? This is the core shift we need to grasp.
To appreciate just how radical this shift is, we have to first look at the nihilist he was most directly engaging with, Arthur Schopenhauer.
Right. Schopenhauer's will to life.
Exactly. He diagnosed existence as this unending void of dissatisfaction, suffering, boredom, and perpetual unquenchable wants, an unquenchable thirst.
And his solution was basically to give up.
Ultimately, yes. His solution was ascetic and life-negating, to negate the will itself through contemplation or detachment, believing that the brief satisfaction you get is never worth the suffering required to achieve it.
It sounds like Schopenhauer was still working within that traditional framework that defines suffering as just bad.
Precisely. Regenster points this out. Schopenhauer still held up the ideal of a suffering-free life as the highest good. And since that ideal is demonstrably unattainable on Earth, earthly existence warrants rejection.
So for Nietzsche, that's a prime example of nihilism.
It is. It's where our highest values devalue themselves. Because these values demand a metaphysical, suffering-free reality, they imply their own unattainability here, and thus become inherently life-negating.
So Nietzsche's revolutionary move was not just to accept suffering, but to completely redefine its philosophical meaning, to break that automatic equation that suffering equals bad.
That is the crucial step. He fundamentally reassessed the nature of suffering. For Nietzsche, suffering is not merely the absence of pain or a means to an end. Instead, he argued that desiring something that is worth enduring pain for is essential to value itself.
We have to value the struggle as much as the prize.
We have to value the difficult experiences, the striving we go through, as much as the objectives. He saw suffering as a necessary resistance that is required for any kind of growth.
And therefore, suffering is inseparable from happiness.
It's an inextricable link. He forcefully rejected the idea that you could have peaks without valleys. He said, "How little you know of human happiness. For happiness and unhappiness are sisters and even twins that either grow up together or remain small together.
The peaks and the abysses are joined.
Intrinsically joined and interdependent."
This acceptance of necessary struggle, then, forms the bedrock of his most dynamic concept, the will to power. And we should clarify this for our listener because it's so often misunderstood as just ambition or dominance.
It's so much more complex than that. The will to power is best understood as humanity's deepest, most fundamental impulse, the desire for the activity of overcoming resistance.
The activity of overcoming.
Yes. It is the impulse toward expansion, growth, mastering an obstacle, and self-overcoming. If our fundamental impulse was merely to avoid suffering and seek comfort, we would stagnate. We'd dissolve into that narcotic slumber he so despised.
But his analysis argues the opposite.
Exactly. He argues the fundamental human impulse is not to avoid suffering, but to will suffering itself, to seek out obstacles, because suffering is the necessary resistance required for power and growth. To find meaning in that suffering and the struggle of overcoming is tantamount to affirming life, absolutely. So now that we have a philosophical context, Nietzsche's critique of negation and his demanding philosophy of affirmation, we can finally transition to its practical, structured application through logic-based therapy.
Right. This is the methodology that provides a roadmap for clients to confront these huge existential conflicts in a real therapeutic setting.
Yet LBT's core premise is that our emotional and behavioral disturbances are rooted in poor, illogical thinking, specifically in deducing unrealistic conclusions from irrational premises.
We disturb ourselves by adopting these irrational musts or oughts about ourselves, others, or the world.
Exactly. LBT then follows a structured 6-step methodology to address this. And we walk through this using the case study of Robert, a 58-year-old businessman.
And Robert is described as having this chronic pattern of relapse, often triggered by disappointment or a sense of hopelessness about the chaos in the world.
Yes. His last major relapse, a 3-day cocaine binge, was triggered after he was forced to close his business due to a new, complex government policy that he saw as completely unreasonable and unjust.
He saw it as the world actively thwarting him.
Correct. So LBT was used to address the underlying philosophical fallacy that predisposed him to this kind of catastrophic reaction.
Let's start with step 1, identifying the emotional reasoning. How do you actually map out that irrational chain of thought that takes Robert from a bad event to substance use?
The process is Socratic and phenomenological. We have to understand his subjective world. LBT uses a formula. Emotion, E, is derived from its intentional object, O, and its rating, RE, O plus R.
Okay, so what was Robert's O and R?
His intentional object, the O, was the business closure and the perceived injustice. His rating, the R, was an extreme condemnation of the entire world. The resulting emotions were anger, deep resentment, and hopelessness.
And you structure that reasoning into a practical syllogism to make it clear.
We do. We use modus ponens to expose the hidden rules that are governing his emotions. Robert's hidden, irrational rule set became crystal clear when we mapped it out.
What did it look like?
It was Rule 1, the irrational premise. Bad things must not happen to me, especially when I work hard and do everything right. Rule 2, the condemnation. Therefore, if bad things do happen, the world itself is intrinsically rotten and unfair. Report, the catalyst. A bad thing happened. My business closed. Conclusion. Therefore, the world is rotten and unfair. And that led directly to the despair and the relapse.
That progression makes the leap so transparently illogical. An external setback becomes a global catastrophe.
It does, which moves us to step 2. Check for fallacies in the premises. The cardinal fallacy we identified in Robert's case is demanding perfection. Specifically, existential perfectionism.
So that's the irrational demand that life, the world, the universe must conform to your idealized, suffering-free image.
Exactly. And when reality inevitably fails to meet this impossible standard, the individual rates the entire world as all bad, leading to despair and condemnation.
Now, LBT identifies 11 cardinal fallacies. Just to give a sense of the system, could you name another one that might predispose someone to addiction?
Certainly. Beyond demanding perfection, a very common one is awfulizing. That's rating an unfortunate event as 100% bad or terrible when it's really just inconvenient or difficult.
Or damnation.
Yes, globally condemning yourself or others for making mistakes. For example, I failed, therefore I am a worthless failure. But Robert's core issue was this existential perfectionism. He demanded a perfect world, and when the world refused, he condemned the entire structure of existence.
And that perfectionistic demand seems like a direct link back to those utopian fantasies Nietzsche critiqued. The emotional result being that resentment.
Resentment is the emotional fallout. It's what recovery programs correctly call the #1 offender. Robert was bound by it. The habitual recycling of perceived injustice that keeps a person emotionally enslaved.
And the Latin root of addict, addictus, means slave.
It does. Resentment keeps the addict a slave to the offending person, the event, or in this case, the unrealistic expectation.
This brings us to step 3. Refute any fallacy. This is where you use the Socratic method to break down the irrationality.
Yes. The refutation focuses on helping Robert see that his demand for a world free of bad things isn't just unrealistic, it's illogical.
Yeah.
He can't control the government or external events, and his refusal to accept the reality of necessary suffering is what's fueling his addictive dynamic.
So you challenge the premises directly.
You do. You ask questions like, can you demonstrate why the universe must conform to your desires? What evidence is there that a business closing means the world is 100% rotten?
And the addiction itself is the ultimate means of maintaining this false sense of control over that reality.
It is. Addiction is fundamentally a refusal to accept the reality of necessary suffering, loss, disappointment, boredom. It's an intense, often unconscious attempt to maintain a narcissistic fantasy of unrealistic, godlike control over everything. Recovery demands that the individual realizes the inevitability of suffering and consciously renounces that attempt at godlike control.
This makes step 4 so critical, identifying and integrating the guiding virtue. What's the constructive concept that replaces this flawed thinking?
The guiding virtue has to be an aspirational ought. It challenges the person toward excellence. For existential perfectionism, the corresponding guiding virtue is unconditional life acceptance.
Which is the ability to accept the inevitable imperfections, the chaos, the suffering inherent in life, without rating the whole of existence as bad.
Exactly. And this acceptance isn't just passive resignation. It's a proactive mental stance. Practicing this virtue leads to a psychological attitude that Cohen calls metaphysical security.
Metaphysical security.
It's the deep internal acceptance of reality's intrinsic imperfections. If Robert can internalize this, it acts as a permanent psychic bulwark against the kind of disappointment that used to trigger his relapse. It changes his entire frame of reference.
I want to deepen the psychodynamic utility here for a moment. You mentioned that these virtues help mitigate fragmentation anxiety. That sounds like a terrifying state to be in.
It is a profound and often unconscious fear. Many people hold on to their faulty thinking and their maladaptive coping mechanisms like their drug of choice because any change threatens their psychic stability. It can lead to fragmentation anxiety.
The fear that the self will just dissolve.
Yes, because the individual's psychic structure is often porous or scant. The drug, or the addiction itself, offers temporary stability. It holds them together.
So the substance is acting like a psychological crutch, a structural prosthesis.
That's an excellent way to put it. From a self-psychology perspective, it's a self-object experience. It provides much-needed psychic scaffolding and maintains emotional homeostasis. This is why you can't just dismantle the flawed logic in steps 1 to 3. That threatens the self with annihilation.
So the guiding virtues provide an alternate adaptive source for that psychic scaffolding.
Exactly. A new, healthy source. It allows the individual to change their maladaptive beliefs without feeling that the foundation of their identity is collapsing.
This connects directly to Carl Jung's famous insight about the alcoholic's spiritual thirst.
Jung's insight is essential here. He noted that the Latin word for alcohol is spiritus, the same word used for the highest religious experience. He believed the thirst for alcohol was a low-level equivalent of the human spiritual thirst for wholeness.
So the cure had to be a spiritual or existential transformation.
Spiritus contra spiritum. A spirit against a spirit. A new spiritus to overcome the poison. LBT's guiding virtues and uplifting philosophies are designed precisely to provide that adaptive spiritual transformation.
Okay, so we've established the problem, nihilism and perfectionism, and the virtue needed, which is unconditional acceptance. Now we reach step 5, finding the specific philosophical concept that can truly deliver this deep acceptance. What's the perfect match?
The answer lies in Nietzsche's most radical, life-affirming concept, Amor Fati,
Love of fate.
the love of one's fate.
This really embodies that idea of metaphysical security. It's accepting everything. But what distinguishes it from just simple passive fatalism?
That's a critical distinction. Fatalism is passive resignation. It's what will be, so I might as well give up.
Yeah.
Amor Fati is an active, willed, radical affirmation.
So you're not just tolerating it, you're embracing it.
You are embracing it to the extent that you would actively wish for it to happen again, eternally. All of it. The suffering, the loss, the injustice. Because it's all part of the necessary chain of events that constitutes your life.
That goes so far beyond the recovery concept of just for today. This is acceptance across all time.
It encompasses the entire spectrum of existence. Nietzsche defined this as his formula for human greatness. He wrote in The Gay Science, "I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Amor Fati. Let that be my love henceforth."
And he also says he doesn't want to wage war against what is ugly. He wants to be a yes-sayer.
That's right. The demand to not merely bear suffering, but to actively love it, is what truly sets this apart.
It's the ultimate expression of the will to power.
It is. In Ecce Homo, he solidifies this. My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati. That one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, but love it. This philosophy is profoundly therapeutic because it collapses that metaphysical distinction between the ideal and the real. It demands that we stop creating a true world beyond this one.
And instead, find the perfection in the necessity of this world, flaws and all.
Exactly.
So Nietzsche's philosophy in this context is not an academic doctrine. It's a rigorous form of self-cultivation, what the Greeks called ascesis.
That is the precise link back to philosophy as a way of life. His work is intended as a means of radical self-transformation, an art of living. It's meant to be lived and experienced through practices of self-mastery and self-perfection aimed at human flourishing. The measure of the philosophy's value is how you live and die according to its dictates.
Which brings us to the final step, step 6. Apply the philosophy through concrete behavioral change. We have to translate this profound concept of Amor Fati into Robert's daily actions.
Right, and first we have to clearly identify his existing irrational behavioral reasoning, which follows a pretty clear self-defeating syllogism.
Let's hear it. Behavioral rule, irrational. When things do not go my way, I use substances to feel better or escape. Justification. Things are not going my way. The world is unfair. Behavioral prescription. Therefore, I use substances to feel better. And the goal is to substitute a rational rule based on the new, uplifting philosophy of Amor Fati.
We construct the new rational syllogism, integrating that guiding virtue of unconditional life acceptance. It looks like this. Behavioral rule, rational. When things don't go my way, I will unconditionally accept my fate. I will unconditionally accept that bad things happen to me, and I will seek alternative meaning through growth. Justification. Things are not going my way. Behavioral prescription. So I will unconditionally accept my fate.
This structure gives Robert an actionable cognitive device. When that feeling of resentment or injustice arises, he doesn't just try to suppress it, he executes a logical counterargument based on a foundational philosophical commitment.
And the successful execution of that final step relies entirely on the capacity for willpower and agency. This leads us into a crucial contemporary philosophical debate within recovery circles.
A debate about free will.
In essence, yes. LBT, following existential philosophy and the 12-step tradition, fundamentally maintains that people possess the capacity to exercise willpower to make constructive changes.
But this view often butts heads with these strong, socially deterministic views of addiction, which prioritize external causes.
It's a necessary confrontation. Socially deterministic views, which are very widespread in certain therapeutic and social justice contexts, argue that social pathologies, poverty, systemic inequality, oppression are the primary, definitive root cause of addiction.
And the risk there is that it conceptualizes the user primarily as a hapless victim of an unfair world.
It is a significant risk. When social factors are treated as absolutely determinate, it risks conceptualizing individuals as having little or no agency, no resilience, no capacity for transcendent choice.
Which, as critics argue, does an injustice to human nature.
It does, because it reduces human complexity and it provides little emancipatory value. If external forces are the sole cause, then internal change or recovery becomes impossible until the external world is perfectly fixed, which is a new form of utopian perfectionist demand.
And history suggests that addiction isn't solely a function of socioeconomic deficit.
Not at all. As sociologists Mugford and O'Malley pointed out, this social deficit model really struggles to account for phenomena like the massive growth in drug use among affluent populations during the 1960s and 70s. These were often privileged individuals in search of pleasure, not the underprivileged in search of escape. Addiction is far more complex than that.
So LBT's stance is not to deny social pressures at all, but to affirm that a personal capacity for change exists regardless of one's initial circumstances.
Precisely. A non-deterministic, resiliency-oriented view proposes that while we are indeed in the world, experiencing the inevitable limitations of our thrownness, we retain the capacity for consciousness, reflection, and the ability to overcome those limitations through conscious choice and will. And this aligns with the reality of millions of people globally who achieve and maintain long-term recovery.
And for Robert, this means reinforcing his new Amor Fati-based behavioral prescription with ongoing, structured philosophical practice.
Yes, the therapeutic recommendation was to incorporate philosophical contemplation, what we call bibliotherapy, into his existing recovery practices.
So reading specific texts.
Reading and reflecting on curated passages from Nietzsche's genealogy of morality in Human, all too human. And this practice would be explicitly integrated into something like the Step 11 meditation, often used in 12-step programs.
How does that look practically? Is he just reading a chapter of a book?
No, it's active contemplation. It's that ascesis we talked about. When Robert is meditating or reflecting on his day, he's instructed to use a Nietzschean, quote, like those on the necessary nature of suffering for growth, to actively reinforce that new, rational behavioral rule.
So when he feels anger about the business closure,
Instead of letting resentment dominate, he consciously reviews the, quote, Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different. This practice transforms the act of recovery from mere forced compliance into a higher form of self-cultivation and self-perfection. It replaces the nihilistic framework with an affirmative one.
this has been a fascinating journey, moving from the abstract critique of Plato's forms all the way to the practical application of logic-based therapy and Nietzsche's command to love one's fate.
It's a big leap.
It is. But we've seen how challenging these illogical premises, particularly existential perfectionism and embracing a radical philosophy of affirmation, can provide a concrete existential pathway out of the self-defeating dynamics of addiction and nihilism.
And the integration of this kind of rigorous philosophical thought into clinical practice really does offer a deeply human and I think a potentially universal approach to treating suffering. It speaks to a fundamental human need for meaning and for structural stability.
A need for that psychic scaffolding.
Yes. We can maybe conclude our exploration by considering the value of philosophical contemplation itself as articulated by Bertrand Russell. His perspective really encapsulates the entire goal of this therapeutic approach.
What does Russell offer us here?
Russell argued that the mind that becomes accustomed to the freedom and impartiality of philosophic contemplation will preserve something of the same freedom and impartiality in the world of action and emotion.
So it changes how you act and feel.
It does. It enlarges the objects of our thoughts, forcing us to view our own personal desires, our disappointments, our injustices, our losses, as, in his words, infinitesimal fragments in a world of which all the rest is unaffected by any one man's deeds.
That is the ultimate non-narcotic antidote to catastrophic perfectionism, isn't it? It reduces the perceived scale of personal disappointment.
It is. This impartiality, which starts as just a desire for truth, translates in action to justice, and in emotion to a broader universal love. It enlarges not only our thoughts, but also our actions and affections. It shifts our perspective. It makes us, as he says, citizens of the universe, not only of one walled city at war with all the rest.
And that citizenship of the universe is what ultimately achieves true freedom and that metaphysical security we talked about.
It liberates us from the thraldom of narrow hopes and fears that arise when we demand that our infinitesimal existence should be perfect or central to everything. If the goal of philosophy, in its original sense, is liberation from fear and the achievement of true, resilient freedom, the recovery of the coherent self, then this connection between LBT and Nietzsche offers a powerful, structural method to achieve exactly that.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry forward from this deep dive. If the goal is liberation from fear and the achievement of true freedom, can you identify a current belief system, a habitual avoidance, or an ideology in your own life that acts less like Nietzschean Rausch, that creative affirmation, and more like a narcotic pharmacon, shielding you from necessary suffering or disappointment?
And if you can identify it, what specific guiding virtue would be needed to overcome that self-deception? What is your personal, actionable formula for Amor Fati? Reflect deeply on the power of Amor Fati and unconditional life acceptance.
They are not permissions to stop striving.
Not at all. They are necessary philosophical commitments that allow you to embrace the struggle and the suffering inherent in life wholeheartedly without requiring a perfect world for your existence to be valuable.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We hope this exploration gives you new philosophical tools for navigating the necessary and ultimately affirming suffering of life. We'll see you next time.